Howdy, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Scannell Agenda. My name is Stephen J. F. Scannell. Today's date is January 2nd, 2020. Happy New Year. And this is show number 120. Today's show is entitled Trump Breaks Logjam, with some help from a little ditch digger. Okay, it's not exactly the right title, but I shortened it up a bit. Now, when you're a drunk or a druggie and your family says, I hate you or we hate you, you all understand that. You're trying to snap somebody out with some tough love. You're trying to snap them out of their devilish behaviors. You're trying to help them with their demon and tell them, look, this is so serious. You know it's serious if your family is telling you that I hate you. Of course, it never happened to me in my family. No one ever said that in my family. I put them to the test when I had a vehicular homicide. But the other test for my family, I think, was the politics that I get into. So I've lost Paul, Eileen, and David, I think, from the politics and what I call the DNA switch. And why would that happen? Well, if someone does a crime and they are in the government, the people that they don't want to see living are those with a story to tell. And the famous adage is, dead men tell no tales. So, now I was not around in 1934, but I can tell you when I was a kid growing up, being schooled by the nuns would say, you cannot hate. You cannot do that. And so I said, no, I can hate. I think it's okay. And I hated Hitler. I did. I didn't think many kids, were playing army as children. They were acting out the World War II movies that they saw and emulating what they saw, etc. But beyond that, I hated, I think, pre-World War II Germany for its acceptance of a tyrant, Adolf Hitler. And I always wondered, why didn't they stop him? Same thing with, I think, Germany or any other, Italy possibly, with Mussolini. So I was a little kid, I think, let's say, born in 1957, in that era. When there were quite a few of these World War II movies around. And there was a bad guy, and you hated the bad guy. And when the bad guy gets shot at the end of the movie, you all cheered, that kind of thing. So I'm from that era. And we were taught in terms of good and bad. I don't think that's really true today. We're taught now that teaching to the children is more like the gray areas. Well, we teach in a gray hue. We do. So I think anything goes in the gray area, So my little title here, Trump Breaks a Logjam, with the help of a ditch digger here. It doesn't start with my life, but let's say when I was born, a little earlier than that, there was a case on Nantucket with the Ponds, and that was in 1954, the Stojak and Cabral case, where the Judge Carolyn Levine found that the ponds on Nantucket were just as much private property as the goldfish are in your goldfish pond. That was a quote, basically. And the case was handled by Judge Poland. He was a retired judge who took the case because this was a big case for Nantucket, and he was a big salty Nantucket judge, Judge Poland. I never knew him, of course. He died before my time. But he would, I'm told, he would sail from Boston in his schooner to Nantucket with a bone in his teeth. It was rough, and he wouldn't mind. So these Nantucket people, I think, if you want to put it this way, let's say when I moved there in 1979 to Nantucket, the Nantucketers and the Nantucket people were what I would call a people of the United States of America, more so than even Cape Cod were a people. Nantucket had some characteristics. And this pond fight that I got into was one of them. And I think I've mentioned this, but I was kind of, I couldn't resist getting into it, excuse me, because old man Charlie Sales, who was a friend of mine, we were on the Fishermen's Association together, so we were friends. You know, he was talking about these native rights, and I said, you know, Charlie, I'll take that with a grain of salt. So he said, okay. You know, it was a real case. I said, okay. You know, and then he brought in this clipping, and he put it in front of me. Just a newspaper clipping from 1954, which I want you all to see. And I begged the Inquirer and Mirror to have it reprinted, and they wouldn't do it, and they wouldn't do it as this battle was raging over the state versus Nantucket on the salt pond issue. But that article, my jaw dropped. You've got to read this article. It would be archived in the Nantucket Athenaeum, along with our other articles from this case, which was the Stojack and Cabral case of 1954. So it was a historic case for Nantucket and for the people of Nantucket whose lives were so enmeshed, intertwined, as they say, with Mother Nature. So the Nantucketers for hundreds of years, and the Indians did this too, would open the ponds. And then the state, Mike Dukakis, etc., the Division of Environmental Quality Engineering, you know, at the opposition of the the opposition of the Division of Marine Fisheries, state of Massachusetts, was opposed to this business of, you know, shutting down the ponds. Now, I opened Hummock Pond twice, so I am one of the people that can say, I know how to drain a swamp. And that's one of the lingo words with Trump is, you know, we've got to drain the swamp. So I'm a ditch digger, so-called, because I can dig, or I used to be able to dig pretty well. I think I still could dig a little bit. I could dig with a shovel and open a pond, which I did, I forget what years it was. Twice I opened Hummock Pond. I did most of my digging, by far and away a lot more digging at Sacajah Pond, but I did open Hummock Pond one year while this controversy was going on, and then it skipped a year and I didn't open it, and then the next year I opened it. And when the ponds get open, the herring come in, so I was able to show my son the herring that were laying their eggs. You know, it wasn't something that I've ever witnessed a lot, but we did witness this in Hummock Pond. The herring would scour out an area with their tail and then lay their eggs. So these controversies about whether or not to open the pond were devastating to the people of Nantucket, and I asked around during this controversy and said, is there anyone who is a Nantucketer who is for, you know, closing these ponds? And the ponds were closed with an executive order by Mike Dukakis. And then, much to his discredit, Weld because he wanted the vote. He went along. And I was approached years ago when Weld got elected. About 30 days after he was elected, it was confirmed by these liberals that they had done a deal with Weld, and that Weld had said yes to them about closing the ponds. And Weld wasn't going to do anything too quickly. He was mulling it over. Of course, the Republican Party, back then it was Henri Rauschenbach, he would come to visit me in jail, as I'd go to jail for digging, for some other reason other than, violation of the Wetlands Act. And what they said I was doing, they wouldn't arrest me for. They would find something else, like trespassing on somebody's beach, like on Sacagawea Pond. That was essentially a public area. So the ditch digger comes in. It's one of my nicknames, I guess, or digger in the jail when I was getting sent over there. That was way back. But this was a fight in the mid-'80s, I think, mid-1980s, 85, 86, 87 maybe. And then there was a big article done in Yankee Magazine, as I mentioned, April 1992. But I never stopped fighting. I never said, okay, it's okay to do this to the Nantucketers, what you liberal people. And I would say Weld is a conservative, but he had to get the votes, So he did what he had to do to get the votes. It was between him and this guy Silber, and the liberals didn't like Silber. He was a hard, kind of a roughneck in the education field. And I think he would have handled them roughly. So they wanted someone they could handle, so they picked Bill Weld, and they threw all this support behind Bill Weld, all these liberals with the DEQE, etc. Now, Trump can break this logjam down there in Washington, D.C., simply because with this story about the ponds, my story here with this little fight with the ponds, you can draw a straight line, point to point, between the rich people on Nantucket and the corruption of the FBI. So, as it happens, I fought my way out of Taunton State Hospital. They had put me in with the intention of having me die there, I believe. And so they said they were going to keep me and they were going to Rogers me. I've never been mentally ill, never. And then they started collecting all these diagnoses for me. So before I went in, they had this write-up for the courts. And I keep it with me in my wallet, and that said that I was delusions of grandeur, delusions of a jealous nature, and homicidal. Oh, my chills went up my spine with the homicidal. And I thought I could have some fun with the delusions of grandeur, since I am a planner, I explained that to the judge when I get out. They're saying I have delusions of grandeur. My father was a planner. I'm a planner. I've got 4 out of 7 town meeting articles that passed. I'm not crazy. I'm not delusional. Okay, it's what they needed to do. But I would have been dead, so, you never would have heard from me if the judge had known to keep me, and that was Judge Macy. Now, he had run a case against me out on Nantucket, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks later, I think it was, and that was a violation of a 209A restraining order. And boy, was he mad, and he told me, you sit down and you shut up. And, we had this trial, and the jury came in with a question about, there was the original order was replaced by a new write-up. And so, the jury had a real beef with doing that because they wanted to see and they wanted to know what the differences were between the old order and the new write-up that the prosecution had for the trial. So what happened was the jury came in, and I was told to shut up by Judge Macy, so I shut up. And he had the tape recorder off, and he said, "Is it off? Is it off?" He was looking at John, one of the court guys. He's gone now, John. So, yeah, he said, "It's off, it's off, it's off." The tape recorder is off. And that guy was so angry, this Judge Macy, telling me I better shut up, or he was going to put me back in Taunton, like that. And he gave me, I think, about a 4 or 5 minute lecture that I had to shut up, so I shut up. And the jury came in, and then he lectured to the jury, and I just sat there, and I didn't have a peep. I wouldn't say a word, because he had threatened me. He had threatened my life. Going back to Taunton would have been it for me. They would have carried out their mission, which was to kill me. And that was to cover up for a DNA issue that they had to make good with this certain person. It was a paternity thing on Nantucket, and the ladies of the church on Nantucket, St. Mary's, they were telling me, and I knew this stuff was going on. So they said, "Okay, I said, "Yeah, I know." And so the paternity case that I complain about is on the petition site. If you're interested, it's on the petition site. And I've had a petition. And previous to that, I was very big on fish folk. And I work at a fairly high level doing my systems work. Fisheries came before all this mess with getting put in Taunton. And, I was highly regarded on fish folk, I think, for my work. And so I was kind of numb, and I asked him at Taunton, "Can't you look at this, huge body of work?" I was, big on this MIT fish folk. Now, since then, and I think because of two reasons. Number one, the one reason was I spilled my guts as soon as I got out of jail on fish folk about the DNA switch and all the stuff that's attached to that, which was a murder, the murder of Jimmy John Capricorn. And I laid it all out, who was involved with that. There were a few people involved that I knew about. And later on, it was admitted to me that he was murdered. So I had that information for the FBI. But the FBI went in with the state police, all the powers that be here in Massachusetts, and they went in with the wrong crowd. So if that test were done now, and you test the mother, the father, the son, and the daughter, they only tested for mother, father, son. And so they switched out the father's DNA for the real father. So it came out, you're the dad. And so that's what I know happened. And they know it, but they're trying to cover up. One of the cover-ups is with the psych industry. So I had been diagnosed with being a paranoid schizophrenic. Off his meds is not a diagnosis, but I've never had meds, so that was kind of in there. And Pam and I had a little rough road early in our marriage due to the sheriff and his friends. And that's another story, but I went to go to the shelter at it was at that point, I think it was under new leadership. So the homeless shelter wouldn't take me because I was a paranoid schizophrenic off his meds. And people that knew me at the clubhouse who dealt with a lot of psych people, they knew I wasn't a paranoid schizophrenic. Off his meds. I've never had meds. I haven't had pill one. I've never said I need help, with that kind of thing. So I've always had a good, strong constitution, physically, morally, psychiatrically. I think I've always been pretty good. I did torture frogs as a little boy, so you could say nobody's perfect. Did you see the Pope the other day? He got his arm jerked off. He got a little angry. So, everyone has their limits once in a while. So yeah, I can fight, I guess you might say, politically. And when I taught Sunday school to fourth graders, I said, we all have a gift. Our job is to find our gift and help other people to find their gift. And then we have to polish up our own gift, and we have to help other people to polish up their gift. So that was my main theme in Sunday school, find your gift. And then, other themes were, in your book of life, you write what you're going to do, in your life. Okay, so I figured Dad had it pretty good, politically. And Dad kind of took me under his wing, somewhat politically. So I would be going to town meetings. At a young age, when I look around, I didn't see any kids going to town meeting. But I was going. So I saw a lot, and I took Dad's training. And I said to myself, if I get a young start, like if Dad got a young start, he'd have been, he could have been a president or a senator. He was that good. So I figured, well, I could be that good if I started young, and then I had this vehicular homicide, and my life went into I wouldn't say a shutdown mode, but I was pretty glum. I really lost my smile. And so, you might say, well, that's too bad, but God gives you these things, as Pam would say. Sometimes what the devil meant for evil, and it could be even the devil in you, and you could be doing something bad, like I was doing something very bad, smoking grass and driving. Back then, drinking and driving was bad, but even then, that was passable. So with me, it was the grass, and I ran a stop sign. And this was October 26, 1975. I was kind of a kid. I was 18. I was just barely 18. So that kind of put the kibosh on, normal politics for me. But I didn't stop. I didn't stop on my political life. I just figured, well, I'll have to be somebody's helper. That'd be okay. As long as you're working for God. I gave my life to God. So I became like on a mission. All right? So this DNA switch did happen, and it cost Paul and Eileen and David. Now, I may be bad for Harwich, but that's still true. If the police don't want to hear about their crimes, it still doesn't change the fact that it's true and there was a DNA switch. So if Trump thinks I'm a paranoid schizophrenic off his meds, that's, that what can you do? If that's what they say, and then Trump agrees with that, but I don't agree that I'm even mentally ill at all, let alone that, let alone 5 minutes, let alone the worst, paranoid schizophrenic off his meds. Doesn't sound good. But it started out with those 3 that I named. And then I went to a psychiatrist, and I was working full-time, working like 70 hours a week, at a boatyard. And then I was working, at one point I worked 100 hours in a week, and I got the paycheck and everything. And they kept asking, you okay? I was working double shifts and 7 days because they needed drivers and they weren't paying their drivers too well. But that was like a $1,000 paycheck. That was pretty good. Anyway, so I've always been a worker, work. And then I figured, well, maybe I should go into this system, the psych system, because it needs help. And I had done the market quota system, and I couldn't think of anything more to do on that because I'd done that system. I finished it. It was done. No system is perfect, but you polish it up with the help of others. And that was done. So I was thinking, this is an opportunity here. This being granted these psych diagnoses, and they started adding to them, And it wasn't until later that I joined Baybridge, and I started twisting their arm. And they twisted my arm back, twisting their arm with the DNA switch. I don't appreciate this, doing this to me. And then they would get back at me with, okay, paranoid schizophrenic. There you go. How do you like that? You know, so it was kind of like lucky to live through that, because Paul and Eileen and David didn't. And I'm sorry to all the people that love David, especially from Harwich, and Eileen and Paul. I'm sorry, but, you know, David couldn't take it. And Dad was imploring David when I was put in Taunton. I had a talk with Dad. I said, Dad, you know, this is politics. There's nothing wrong with my head, and, you know, this is what they're doing in answer to this paternity deal here going on that they wanted to cover for the ex-wife. Now, you've heard about the lore of the Clintons being the kind of the bad people who kill people, but I don't know how true that all is. But I can tell you that my ex-wife on Nantucket worked quite a bit with, or whatever, knew the Clintons intimately. And, you know, when my mother was in the nursing home, and I'm sure she knew I would see this, but, you know, there was a Christmas card there. Merry Christmas from Bill and Mary Ellen. And it shows Bill Clinton with Mary Ellen. And that was no doctor of a photograph, because I know they had a relationship. But if you want favors done that aren't good, you know, you talk to the big political people, they can swing it, you know. So I was never intended to get out of Taunton and start yakking like this. But when I get out, I went on to Fish Folk. So please, Donald Trump, get the archives from Fish Folk and go through what I was talking about when I get out. I spilled my guts about this murder of Jimmy John Capricorn that the FBI chose to cover up. And they instead went with the state police and that whole nutty crowd. So what happened was, when I get out, they figured that, you know, if they killed me, there'd be too much publicity against, you know, them with this DNA thing. A lot of people that knew would demand that the DNA test be done. Okay, that's the Scannell agenda. Thank you very much for watching.